Well, hello and welcome to East Union Christian Church and our message for this Sunday, February the 6th. We are coming to you from my living room again because we had quite a bit of ice and snow with the storm that we had Thursday and Friday, and the church board decided that they thought it was best to cancel to stay safe. And I hope that you have been safe. Where I live in Lawrenceburg, we don't have much snow. We've just missed it all year long, it seems like. But we've seen pictures of things that go on online. We've seen the pictures of around Bath County and places close to the church, and you've gotten a whole lot more than we ever got. And so I hope that you're being safe and that you're staying warm during this time. And we hope to see you next week at East Union Christian Church. We want to remind you of many things that we have coming on. We have our Valentine banquet for next Sunday. You might want to check the Facebook page, and we'll put more information about that before we have that next Sunday at the church building. But also remember that this is a year that we're a journey with Jesus. Our Journey with Jesus 2022. And I hope that you're really into the Bible readings, that you're into the things that we've given you, as I've challenged everyone to read through the entire Bible in 2022. The one-year Bible is the plan that I'm using. If you have your smartphone or a tablet, you can always download that, and it will keep you up to date. You will be able to catch up if you miss a day or whatever. I will also put that on the weekly readings on the Facebook page and our MeWe page. And also I have the monthly readings that are available to you at the church. So let's make 2022 a journey with Jesus at East Union Christian Church. Now, this morning we continue that journey of Jesus, or journey with Jesus, as we continue looking at the life of Christ from John chapter 2, starting with verse 13 through 22, a very powerful passage of Scripture. And I've entitled today's message, House Cleaning with Jesus. House Cleaning with Jesus. Now folks, I'm going to tell you, I always have good intentions when I put certain things on my to-do list. For example, almost every evening I will write down the things that I want to do the following day. And this is a sample of what I might have on my cell phone, and it also shows on my computer and on my tablet. But several days a week I'll have something like this. I'll have my sermon preparations. I work on that throughout the week. Maybe run the vacuum in our house. Do the laundry. I do the laundry at our house because I'm retired and I take care of that. Run the dishwasher. Clean the bathroom. My wife is over here grinning at me and shaking her head. No way. Okay, really, that's rarely on there. Or if it is, I get distracted. Invariably, I'll have a long list of things there, and invariably, I won't get them all done. And when I do try to get them all done, I'll miss something. Sometimes it's just a mistake, but usually it's because I get distracted and get pulled away from the things I really want to do. And when you think about it, that's a lot of times how it is in our Christian life. We might have every good intention of doing what we think we should do. We might even have a list of things that we put on our smartphones or that we'll put on our calendar that we'll have a to-do list. And I admit, I've done it. Sometimes we'll have this as our Christian to-do list. We'll say, we want to read the Bible. We want to pray. We want to make sure that we go to church or give to the church, and that we tell someone about Jesus Christ. And we make that list, and it's not a bad list. At least for me, it helps me to develop the disciplines that I think that are very important. But I admit on that as well, I sometimes fall short. As I've emphasized this year, I hope that you'll join me in reading the Bible completely through. It takes discipline. But I'm going to also tell you that there's days I may miss. And you might miss. It's not that you intend to, but we let the things of the world, things that are going on, sometimes things that are very important, things our family or sickness or something happens that we don't read the Bible every day. And it happens. It happens, folks. I'm not saying that that's the ideal, but I'm saying it's a reality. And the reality is that we can get distracted. Even when we have good intentions, we can still get distracted. And even when we're doing things, it's easy to get distracted by doing rather than truly following Jesus Christ. We can get distracted by what we do that it overshadows following Jesus Christ. I think I've heard it illustrated by the childhood game, Follow the Leader. You know that game where you have a young person in the front and they say, you have to do what the leader does. And they might do some crazy movements with their hands or something. And pretty soon it becomes that you get so focused on that leader that you don't know where you are, you don't know what you're doing or whatever, and you lose. You end up losing. Sometimes that's how the Christian life is, that we get distracted so much by doing rather than by truly following Jesus Christ. And I think if we're truly going to follow Jesus Christ, if we're truly going to make 2022 our journey with Jesus, we have to have our focus and our passion on Him. Following Jesus isn't for the easily distracted. You've got to focus on Him and have your passion on Him and focus on what's important. It's been written, folks, by a man named Rick Stacy. He says, you must have a sharpness in your spiritual vision that penetrates the world's ability to blur, to distract, and to misdirect your attention. And I think it's a very true statement, that it's easy to get distracted and lose focus on what we are supposed to do and what's important for us and what's important to Christ. But I want you to remember this, folks, that we have to have a passion for Christ and what's important to Him. Folks, if we're going to have a passion for Christ, we have to have a spiritual house cleaning. And that's what Jesus did in John chapter 2, early in His ministry. I want you to read with me from John chapter 2, verses 13 through 22. Now, I'm going to be reading from the New International Version, and I hope that you can see this. There's not a glare on there, but if you can, it's John chapter 2, verses 13 through 22. And like I said, I'm reading from the New International for today. It said, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, He found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So He made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, He said, get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market. His disciples remembered that is what is written, zeal for your house will consume me. The Jews then responded to Him, what sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this? Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days. They replied, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days? But the temple He had spoken of was His body. After He was raised from the dead, His disciples recalled what He had said. Then they believed the Scripture and the words Jesus had spoken. You see, Jesus called for a house cleaning. And interestingly enough, this event in Jesus' life is referred to as the cleansing of the temple. Jesus gave the temple a deep cleaning, and he showed that it was much more than people see or look for. So I want to give you some ideas this morning. There's two ideas I want you to look at in this text. First of all, we can have dirty distractions. I want to give you a little bit of background here. Jesus had come into Jerusalem at the time of the Passover, early in his ministry. Now, this is a pretty common or a pretty well-known passage of Scripture. There's actually another one referred to in Matthew chapter 21 and Mark 11 and Luke 19, which are near the end of of Jesus' ministry. Some say that John did this early so he could establish something about Jesus, but that overlooks some differences in how these events are presented. I'm not going to go into all those. You can read them all if you want. But I think that the thing is that I believe there's two different times that Jesus did this in the temple. Now some would disagree, and that's okay. But remember, John said that in John chapter 20 that Jesus did so many things that he didn't even write about. But he wrote those so that we would believe. Jesus came into the temple and he found people selling the animals, selling birds for people to make sacrifices. Now this was done as a matter of convenience for those who traveled a long way. You know, they had to have those ritual sacrifices, and if they traveled a long way, it wasn't easy to do so. And then there were the money changers. You know, when you go into a foreign country, if you've ever gone to a foreign country, you have to have your money exchanged for the currency in that country. Now in those days they had to change the money for the temple. The Roman coins were engraved with the emperor's face or the emperor's likeness or something else, and some people believe that that made them unfit in the Jewish eyes for use in the temple. Remember, they based that on the Ten Commandments, where Moses was given the Ten Commandments, and one of the commandments was not to have graven images. Others believe that there were other reasons for the exchanges. Whatever the case, the money that the people brought had to be exchanged for the Jewish currency called shekels. And this became known by some people as the temple tax coin. And it is against this backdrop that some people saw a real business opportunity. They saw where they could make a lot of money. Because if someone brought a lamb or some other animal in for slaughter, if they brought their own, those inspectors there was inspectors there, and those inspectors would look at that animal and they would say, oh, well, this isn't good enough. You're going to have to buy one here. And the money changers, they were glad to exchange your money for the shekels at an exorbitant fee, obviously. And who was making the profits? Well, they were, and then the high priests were apparently getting some kickbacks on it. Bill O'Reilly, who was one of the great news commentators of our day, has a series of books called Killing Jesus, killing a lot of different people, killing Patton, killing Lincoln and all, but in his book, Killing Jesus, it's a fascinating look at the life of Christ written in a historical perspective. And in his book, Killing Jesus, he wrote, "The money changers demand unfair exchange rates for the privilege of turning local money into shekels. The temple high priests also profit from this scam. Within the temple's inner courts are massive vaults filled with the shekels and the foreign coins exchanged each year by the pilgrims. When the temple loans that money, and as it so often does, to peasants who need help in paying their taxes, the interest rates are exorbitant. Ledger sheets within the temple's grand vaults keep a tally of all debts, and those who cannot repay suffer severe indignities, the loss of a home, loss of land and livestock, and eventually life as a debt slave or membership in the unclean class. The slums of Lower Jerusalem are packed with families who were driven from their land because they could not repay money they borrowed from the temple. It's a system that was corrupt to the core. It was the epitome of corruption. And it was making God's house into a marketplace. They had made God's house all about money. O'Reilly pointed out that while the Passover was about faith, it was also about money to these people. It was estimated by some people that as many as 4 million Jews came into Jerusalem at that time. I'm not sure where they got that figure, but that was the estimate. And that meant, when you had that many people, what does that mean? You're going to make more money for the shopkeepers and the innkeepers and the people that did business. But the most money was made by the religious leaders and the people selling there at the temple, selling animals for sacrifice or exchanging the coins. The people knew that and they loathed them. So Jesus walked in, and up to this point in his ministry, we don't know of any great crowd around him. The most attended social event that we know of at this point in his ministry, this was early in his ministry, remember, the only thing that we know of that had much of a crowd at all was the wedding feast at Cana, where he turned the water into wine, which we talked about last week. But he walks in, he walked past the temple, the people selling the animals at the temple, he walked past the money changers, and he'd been there before. Remember, Jesus was a Jew. He kept all the rituals. He kept all the celebrations throughout his life. He'd been there before, and he saw what? That nothing had changed. Absolutely nothing had changed for these people. And so Jesus obviously was upset. And so he made a whip that drove the sheep and the cattle out. And I'm sure the people that were milling around also left. I grew up on a farm, and I've seen how cattle and other animals act. I can only imagine what this scene was, to have those animals there, and then maybe thousands of people, hundreds at least, maybe thousands, all going out when Jesus drove them out. And then he had a look, I'm sure, that combined anger and determination and righteous indignation, and he turned over the tables of the money changers. He turned those things over, and he sent the coins going flying everywhere. Now folks, these were not little old card tables like we might set up. These were probably big, heavy wooden tables that were there all the time. But you got to remember, Jesus was around 30 years old at this time. He'd been working as a carpenter, so he had to be a very strong man. People like to have this picture of Jesus being around and always being calm and all. But here we see something different. He's not just allowing somebody to run over him here. What does he do? In verse 16, look what he said. He said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." You see, they'd made God's house into something for them, for their own profit. It made it all about them, and the corruption was just rampant. They were ripping people off. They knew it, the people knew it, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. In the other instance of Jesus cleansing the temple, he referred to the people as robbers. Whatever they did was an affront to God. You see, in the outer court where all this happened, that was where Gentiles could actually come and pray. They couldn't go any farther in, but they couldn't even pray there in peace because of all this commotion, of all this marketplace there. Instead of going outside the temple, they went inside there and made the distractions and the commotion for people. And Jesus cleaned house. Folks, a lot of times people want to apply this scripture. Say when you have a guest speaker who's written some books maybe, they say, well, this shows you can't sell those. Or if you have a singing group that comes in to sell CDs, or comes in to sing and has some CDs with them, they say, well, this shows you can't do that. Folks, I don't believe that's the case. I believe this is in a different direction. It's all about your attitude and about your heart. You know, the people I've been in contact with in my ministry always have had the loving heart and just want to give something to help people in their everyday lives. It's not about the money to them. Jesus was about the attitudes. What is your attitudes? My question is, do we allow dirty distractions to soil our souls? Do we allow our own desires to become a distraction from having a real relationship with God? You see, this passage of Scripture deals with Jesus overturning corruption in a place of worship. It's about your attitudes. See, later in his ministry, Jesus talked more explicitly about this. Remember, several times he talked about our attitudes were as important as the action. He said, if you lust after someone, what? You have committed adultery. If you hate someone, you might as well have murdered them. On the other side, he said, the woman who might have given a penny out of her poverty gives more than the one who might give $100 out of their wealth. You see, what did Paul say? In Romans chapter 12 and verses 1 and 2. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Folks, if we're going to really follow Jesus, we have to have a house cleaning in our hearts. And that leads me to the second point today, is that we must strive to be white robe clean. I thought of that as I was coming up with this message this week. When we talk about cleaning our house, and we talk about a standard of excellence, what do we talk about? The white glove. He gets the white glove treatment. And the white glove, if it's clean, is not going to show dirt. Well, Jesus says that, or the Bible says several times, that His people are washed. And we will eventually have white robes, as the imagery we're given. In other words, we should strive to be pure and holy in all we do. I think verse 17 is very interesting. The disciples had never seen Jesus angry like this. But they remembered a quote from Psalm 69:9. It says, His disciples remembered that it is written, zeal for your house will consume me. do we have that zeal for God's house? Do we really have that zeal and desire to do everything for Him and put God first in all we do? Zeal for His house will consume. And then look what happened. The Jews wanted to know, they said to Jesus, by what authority do you have to do this? They didn't actually question the actions. They questioned, do you have the authority to do this? And Jesus said, you destroy this temple and I'm going to rebuild it in 3 days. Now people thought He was crazy because they said, this temple where we are is taken 46 years to get here and you can rebuild it in 3 days. Obviously Jesus was talking about His resurrection. And folks, I think that's the point. When Jesus was risen from the dead, He was talking about a radical change. His entire ministry was talking about a radical change, not just from the doing, but having the hearts that follow God and doing everything for Him. Jesus wasn't just someone who was reforming an old religion. He was calling for a radical faith in God. There's to be no fakery, no putting on. There's to be no superficial religion. It was to be out of the heart, no corruption. And Jesus' zeal was for the house of God. One writer said, when He saw that which had no place in the temple, He was compelled to clean it up. There was never any doubt in Him what was right and what was wrong. See, Jesus had this zeal for the temple in Jerusalem. He had a zeal for His mission and a zeal for His people. So that leads us up, as I'm closing this morning, it leads us to a very pertinent question about this story. You see, God didn't form us just to follow the right rituals. Yes, it's important to worship. I want you to be in church every time you can. And folks, I miss it when we have to meet together like this. Yes, we need to be meeting together. It's important to do so. It's important to partake of the Lord's Supper each week. All these things remind us of our relationship with God and our relationship with people. But the lesson that I think that Jesus showed us when He cleansed the temple, when He came through and drove everything out and He turned the money changers' tables over, the lesson that He gave us is that when we come together, folks, excuse me, I can't hardly talk. His lesson is that when we come together, it's to be about God. It's to be glorifying Him. Our entire lives are to be about glorifying God and be about Him. It's about our hearts, not the mechanics of the church, but about, do we really follow Him deep in our heart? It's all about Him. As I close this morning, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. How do we best glorify God while here on earth? There's many ways you can do so, but the most pertinent is following Him in your heart and having a spiritual house cleaning in your heart. Folks, I love you very much. Can't wait to see you next week, February 13th. Remember our Valentine's dinner afterwards. And I just hope you have a great week and follow Christ in all you do. See you then.